This is Monster Manual MASH. This is the podcast where we dig into every entry in the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. We're going entry by entry. We're looking at every little weird freak they got in this thing. And we're looking at the words that they've written to try to entice you, who is probably a dungeon master, into using the material that they've written for you. We look at how they've written it, what it suggests about an encounter with this monster, what it suggests about the vibe, the monster's vibe, and how to exploit that to maximum effect, because it's not always written very clearly, but there's usually nuggets of gold in here. And we also, on top of all that, we look at the monster's origins in myth, in stories, in various cultures, as long as it's written somewhere on the internet for me to find. And that's what we do. I'm Chris. And that's Wes. And we're trying a new recording program. So hopefully that works well. But we don't even need to record well, because the subject matter is one of the most dungeony monsters that they've got. We're talking about the Flameskull.
Yeah. Get ready for like a lo-fi dungeon punk monster.
Oh, lowest of the low. This is like,
yeah,
when you scrape the barrel, it's just a bunch of flame skulls come out of it. So what we got here, first paragraph: blazing green flames and mad echoing laughter follow a disembodied skull as it patrols its demesnes. Demesnes? I never know how to pronounce this word. I've never heard it spoken out loud.
Demesnes, I think. Wait,
domain? I think it's domain, right?
I guess.
But it's so close to domain, like domain. It's just spelled like fancily. It's like it's the whilst of this word.
We are looking at how to pronounce this word in English, designating all the land retained and managed by a lord of the manor under the feudal system. How do you go about pronouncing it? Domain. Domain. You do want to stress on the second syllable, on the main syllable. Domain. Pretty straightforward once you know. Domain. And now you know.
Focus right back onto the Flameskull. It discovers trespassers, and it blasts them with fiery rays out of its eye sockets, and it shoots deadly spells called up from the dark recesses of its memories. So good stuff so far. Easy to follow instructions.
Yeah.
Shoots you with eye rays, dreadful spells, mad echoing laughter, green flame.
Yeah.
Like, you've got visual description, audio description, so you can have it like echoing off the walls before characters even come close to it, which is good foreshadowing. Get people frightened. The eerie flickering green light is nice. You can have that coming around a corridor and getting people scared. Like, I've had players hesitate for, I don't know, it feels like hours before turning a corner or like figuring out some plan, before they open a door. So lots of good stuff there. All of the sensory experience of it suggests unambiguous danger. Flickering green flame, mad echoing laughter. Like, this isn't going to be good.
Yeah, like a burning green skull that's cackling. That's
yeah. There's no debating. Like, if you see this, you hear this, even the suggestion of it, and then when you're confronted with the actual image of the flying green skull, there's very little ambiguity. It's not like you're going to debate whether or not to talk to this thing or whether it means you harm. Like, it definitely does. You're not gonna
Yeah.
ask like, what does it eat? What is its like mating rituals?
Yeah. Well, we're in its natural habitat, so maybe we'll just give it some space.
Yeah, you can't trick it with like some food or like wait till it has to go to the bathroom or something. So this is like a computer role-playing game, CRPG dungeon monster.
Yeah,
At first glance, I think you can get kind of deeper with it
totally.
as the description goes on. Dark spellcasters fashion flameskulls from the remains of dead wizards. So normally when I think like we talked about a lot, I like it when monsters are more singular, when they're like inscrutable. They have their own unique things going on, their own unique lore. But I think this is great. A powerful wizard has to kill lower level wizards to make a flameskull.
Yeah, totally. It's like this has got to be like this sort of like a chain of like wizards sort of at place there, you know?
Yeah, and it feeds into the mechanics of magic in the game pretty well, because although magic can do anything, really, the way it works in the game as far as the players are concerned is that there are a limited number of set spells that produce reliable outcomes. So a wizard is in the business of figuring out a spell that has a reliable outcome. So knowing that like there's a spell that is floating around on the like magic dark web somewhere that you can look up, if you've gone this way, if you've gone the route of the like necromancer, you can like find this spell floating around in like the anarchist cookbook of magic
Yeah.
that lets you
Open
figure
up
out how to make.
or and type
Yeah.
something into the browser and find it.
Yeah. So I like this because it works well lore wise and it works well mechanically. And it also works as something you can use for the actual adventure. Like you can have it be an avenue of investigation if there are like low level wizards disappearing, or like known graves of low level wizards being robbed, or even like high level wizards being robbed, or like it could be one of those deals with like a Sith or just a generally untrustworthy master and apprentice relationship where the master is just kind of grooming his apprentices. He's going to keep some of them, he's going to cull some of them and turn them into flame skulls, or like that's what he does with unsatisfactory minions.
It would make a great cult / pyramid scheme. like like that being the sort of like antagonistic force is there's a wizard who's got a bunch of people convinced that they are going to become powerful wizards, but like either he's just getting them killed so he can harvest their skulls to make more flame skulls, or he's convincing them like, oh, I could make you into a flame skull, or you could go find some even weaker wizards and make them into flame skulls, and then they'll work for like it could be a whole flame skull pyramid.
The next paragraph is Legacy of Life. A flame skull only dimly recalls former life. It might speak with its old voice and recount key events from past life, but these are only echoes of its former life. The undead transformation allows them access to their magic without the material or somatic components. So it's kind of weird because they can have something of a personality from their old life, but in their stat block, they have a really high intelligence, which is to help, I think, boost the effectiveness of their spells. But it makes it a weird conflict between what the paragraph is saying about their personalities and what a high intelligence creature might seem like. And it suggests that you can also have a conversation with them. So they're not purely like machines. They can have a conversation because they have their old voice and they can recount events from their last life, and they have a very high intelligence, but they're not truly, like, it seems like they're not even sentient necessarily. It's a weird like line to walk.
It is weird because I'm trying to reconcile like the image in my head I have of a flame skull flickering in like this dark stone dungeon, cackling wildly, just this like flaming, unpredictable skull shooting spells around, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that fact that it's like a sentient being that can communicate and like has like a like is very intelligent, can like solve problems and think creatively, whatever intelligence means, like it's hard for me to like put those together unless it's like, well, becoming a flame skull makes you completely insane.
Yeah.
Like that's the only way I can sort of get it to get it to make sense.
Yeah, and I think it's like you could use this somehow in an adventure or an encounter rather, where it's like you have the Flameskull like muttering to itself about its past life, and then maybe that information you could either disregard it entirely and just treat it as a very hostile like dungeon creature, or if you investigate what it's saying and even try to engage with it in conversation and tease out some more detail, like in the thing we were just talking about where it's like an apprentice of the evil necromancer that made it, or a former apprentice rather, it can tell you details about the interior of the lair. It can tell you about like other creatures, other ways you can like you just get information to help the players somehow, ways to circumvent a trap, weaknesses, locations of treasure, shit like that, you know, but only if you interact with it.
Yeah, and then the tricky part about that is like it's a floating flaming skull, you know, with glowing
Yeah.
eyes. Like
Yeah, that's
it's
one of those. Yeah, it's one of those things. Sometimes when I've put stuff like that in a game where it's like this looks like one thing, but if players investigate, they'll discover all this other shit, and it's like they spend 2 seconds looking at it, make a snap decision, move on with their lives, and like never even come close
yeah,
to what I was hoping would happen. And it's like,
yeah,
well, that's kind of my fault because what else would they expect? Even though I try to tell them outside of the game that there's lots of stuff that they miss because they don't get into it, but it's like you have to let people stumble into it, even though it hurts when they don't figure it out.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, meanwhile, they'll spend 2 hours, trying to navigate a blind corner where there's nothing around the corner.
Yeah, exactly. You've accidentally described something interesting that you didn't mean to, or it's like a made up detail on the fly, and now it's taken
Oh,
over the
man.
entire thing.
Sometimes I've just, like, improvised some little details about something,
Yeah,
and I've had to, like, go back and, like, retcon my own story to, like, make that important because I just spent too much time talking about, I don't know, the soup or whatever in the
yeah.
tavern, and now the soup has to be important because I talked about it a bunch.
Yeah, exactly. Everything you mention, and it's not like the player's fault because this happens to everyone. You know, it can seem like, oh, my players are so stupid, why aren't they like listening? But it's like, no, they're doing like you would do the exact same. You
Yeah,
have no information and you are holding on to whatever little crumbs fall out of the DM's mouth, and then you have to decide if those crumbs are red herrings, if they are deliberately meant to like entice you into a trap, depending on the DM style and the
yeah,
relationship. It's constantly like almost everything I say is treated as like a potential weapon that I'm using
yeah.
against them.
It's like it's just everything is a Chekhov's gun.
Exactly. So if
Yeah,
you like you really have to, if you're going to use a flame skull as like an avenue of investigation or like include little tidbits of information you can get from the flame skull, you really have to be like, I think you need to telegraph it a little bit, or you need
yeah,
to set it up ahead of time so that a smart player can put things together and be like,
yeah,
oh, so we know this guy used to be an apprentice of this creature, and we know maybe they can learn ahead of time that flame skulls can talk about their former lives.
find a journal next to like some kind of writing utensil, you know, like a fountain pen, and you can tell that the
Yeah.
fountain by bite marks on it that it's been like held by teeth to like hold it in place to write, and there's like
Ooh,
singes on the
yeah.
paper, right? And then you see the flame skull. It's like, oh, so if you're writing by holding something in your teeth and burning the edges while you were writing, it could be this guy. Hey, let's talk to him.
And then yeah, then you see him walking or flying around with like a pen in his mouth or something
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
to really hammer it home. Like, yeah, so that's I think that's a great idea. Because I also think like as much as these are just your basic, this is like a very basic, if you wanted it to be, dungeon opponent. I think the simplicity of the setup of it is like very rich and could provide like a really good hook in a dungeon, like a really good hinge for a lot of action. But I think in order to spice it up a bit more, you need to consider giving the Flame Skull more spells to reflect the variety of wizards they could come from, especially if you're going to have more than one in a dungeon. But having just the one, if you only have it be one, that's okay. They're only CR4, so they're relatively low level, but they have Fireball, which is
Yeah.
potentially lethal to a group of players that on paper shouldn't have a problem with the CR4. This is something I suspected, and then I looked it up, and the harder core nerds verified it. It can possibly wipe out like a 10th level group or something like that, depending on their makeup. Or like could seriously cause a problem. It only has the one fireball, but all of its other spells are kind of like high damage spells, and it has a lot of resistances. It's kind of hard to kill, and it's maneuverable. And if it runs out of spells, it can just shoot you with lasers or fires out of its eyes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe keep that idea, but also maybe in order to give it more of a, if you wanted to like suggest more of the personality of the person that became the Flameskull, you can like learn something about what kind of wizard they were, and then this Flameskull has its like favorite spells ready to go or something. But honestly, if you're gonna fight it, it's gonna last like 3 rounds or something on average. So it's not that important, I guess. The next paragraph is eternally bound. Intelligent and vigilant, they serve their creators by guarding treasures, persons of interest, passages, etc., yada yada. It obeys commands given to it when created and follows them to the letter. Its creator must take care to craft their instructions. Yeah. So this seems like you could do 2 things with this. You could just make it be a very effective like dungeon sentry or guardian, or you could make it so that an inexperienced necromancer made a Flameskull and gave it kind of shitty instructions that you can now that the players can somehow like wiggle their way through actually fighting it.
Little loopholes.
Yes.
Yeah. It reminds me, just having like it have to be specific instructions like that. It reminds me of this episode of X-Files. I forget most of it, but it ends up with there's a genie, and Mulder has to like make a wish for the genie to like fix the problem, but there's always an ironic twist, and so where it's page after page after page of like legalese, like wish language, covering all of his possible bases with the wish to make sure that like to cover any possible ironic twists.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if whenever you have a creature is like, okay, it follows the instructions to the letter, you run into all kinds of like iRobot, 3 laws of robotics problems.
Yeah, which this is basically, because it's an automaton created to serve a will. So yeah, there's lots of fun in that. I was reading one report of a group of players that so the Flameskull was instructed to guard an object, but they cast a spell that like hid the object from the Flameskull. A barrier went in front of it or something, and the skull didn't know why, so it became non-hostile because it couldn't see the object and it was freaking out trying to find it. And like half the players were like talking with it and coaxing it and like trying to be gentle with it, and the other half were like secretly stealing it.
Yeah. So if there's like this big evil wizard who's got like a serious, evil layer operation going on, and has a bunch of flame skulls sort of acting as like sentries, you could have a situation where like maybe you could intercept the specific orders, like if they're written orders, and it could be sort of like a sort of subterfuge, like sneaky kind of a thing to have to do is like, okay, well, we can't just fight all the flame skulls because I don't know, maybe there's like a separate corridor where there's like little slots the flame skulls can shoot their fireballs through, but they've got their own little network of hallways to go through, so you can't really get them directly. It's like a very good security system, all these like crazy intelligent skulls, but they got to get orders and you can intercept them, and maybe you could like make a safe path for you to go or somehow cause the whole thing to backfire. I don't know. There's a lot you can do with like they have to follow orders, that whole thing.
Yeah, knowing the orders that they have. The Eldritch Rejuvenations. A shattered flame skull regenerates unless the remains are splashed with holy water or have dispel magic cast on it. If it can no longer fulfill its purpose, it is beholden to no one and becomes autonomous. If they become autonomous, you have to ask, like, what does it want? Does it want to obey the rules and it's like lost without them, or does it hold on to some motivation of its past life? Are they like a demon or devil that's bound to a summoner, or are they more
Oh man,
neurotically attached?
Yeah, what if they try to go home and it's like a whole like RoboCop situation?
The Flaming Skull tries to go home to his wife and children.
The quest is you just got to like help the Flaming Skull like sort of accept their fate and get closure.
Yeah, what if they don't know that they are a Flaming Skull?
Oh yeah.
You know, they're trapped in their own illusion world, and they're like, "Honey, I'm home." And then you have to try to help this like poor creature like accept its new life.
I love it.
It becomes like Kung Fu: The Adventure Continues or something, where it's just like this
Yeah.
wandering flame skull travels the earth and tries to right wrongs or something. You could also decide that a flame skull that is no longer able to fulfill its purpose like regains its memories or something, if you wanted to like explore that weird avenue.
Yeah. And what happens if you give it the rest of his skeleton, you know?
Oh yeah, I just watched Baron Munchausen. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but there's a great section where Robin Williams plays the like king of imagination, and he's just this disembodied head who's flying around creating and maintaining the world, the universe. Or he's the king of the moon, actually. But the idea, he's just sort of this like king of imagination. His headless body enters the room and tries to capture him and put him on his head. And while the head only wants to deal with matters of the universe, once he's on the body, all the body wants to do and his makeup changes so that he's like flushed. He looks like an eggplant. So his head just gets so full of blood suddenly, and all he wants to do is like tickle his wife's feet, tickle the queen's feet, which is like a silly euphemism for some kind of moon sex, I think. That's all he wants to do. So he's like stuck in the realm of the body and sensuality. There's no thoughts, there's no like planning, there's no bigger picture. And then he's relieved when like the head is severed again, and the head is like relieved and grateful to be away from the body forever.
That's very Neoplatonic, like the philosophy. Like there's the Plotinus. He's like kind of the whole idea of like like the mind and like truth and like facts in the universe. Like that's what's actually really good. Anything physical or bodily is bad, and that was like really influential to early theology, Christian theology and stuff. But like Plotinus, and he was this philosopher, and then he had this idea that you had to strike the cosmic pose. Like there's literally just like a bodily position you could put yourself in, and that would put you in harmony with the universe and like make you forget you had a body, so that you could just focus on purely thinking about abstract goodness.
What is that position?
Oh well, that's the I think the idea was because he was also.
Are you in that? Are you in it right now?
I'm trying. It's the various. They're not working, but I think the sort of idea, and like he's regarded as a philosopher now, but like really, he was like kind of a cult leader, I think, because I think the whole idea was that if you actually figured out the position, you would just like dissolve and like sublimate and like become like a forest ghost, basically. you know, your body would disappear if you became enlightened. And part of that was just like putting your body in the right position to do that. And so if you were headless and you could remain headless without dying, you probably wouldn't have to worry about putting your body in the right position. You could just focus on the moon stuff,
Yeah. There's in the Forgotten Realms, there's a very important book called The Circle of Skulls, which is the last of the what is this? Part of a series of books. Circle of Skulls. It's the sixth and final novel in the Waterdeep series by James P. Davis. It concerns 9 of the circle were originally wizards and clerics of Mistra. The 9 entered into a pact with Asmodeus, which is not good. They offered to undertake a ritual known as the First Flensing, which would extend a formal invitation to Asmodeus to enter Waterdeep. So they're basically asking Satan to come in to like a big major city. Satan goes to New York. Satan takes New York, basically.
Yeah.
In exchange, the wizards would receive the gift of immortality. The wizards reneged on the deal and were changed into their current form and bound to a location in Farah's Alley in Waterdeep. For many years, the circle was merely a local curiosity. So it's a literal circle of Flameskulls that would occasionally materialize and shoot flames at passersby, but they rarely did any damage. That's a quote.
I
Which
love
sounds like,
that.
yeah. Which sounds like a city's official report indicating why they didn't do anything about the Circle of Skulls, because they
Yeah.
rarely do any real damage. More of an attraction. So those
love
are
that, though.
people that
It's-
accidentally turn themselves into Flameskulls, possibly by getting into the correct position.
striking the cosmic pose to bring the devil to New York.
Yeah. Something else about the Eldritch Rejuvenations. They will come back in an hour. In the stat block, it goes into more specific. So if you don't splash it with holy water or cast Dispel Magic on it, it comes back, which is something that you should use at least once. Because most people aren't going to think anything of an enemy after it's been defeated, downed, killed, whatever you want to describe it. So then you have them have to come back. You put this thing in like a corridor that they have to travel through again, or somewhere like that. And then that's more juice you get out of this, right?
Yeah.
And then further, you can even make it more annoying because they don't necessarily know what will make it finally go away. They might think it'll rejuvenate forever. And this is something we've probably talked about before, where you have to decide if you want something to be discoverable through merely a skill check, like an arcana check or a knowledge check, or if you need this to be discoverable within the game itself. And then they can discover it or not, depending on their actions.
Yeah, it is sometimes tricky when someone's like, can I roll a religion check to see if I already know how to deal with this,
Mm-hmm.
Which is fine, but
yeah, you run into the problem of like people build their characters a certain way or in order to do these kinds of things, and if you make it out of their reach every time, then it's frustrating for them. But at the same time, you have to maintain some level of wonder, some level of like unpredictability in the world. It's tough.
yeah.
So I don't know what my particular advice would be, but I was reading there are a few reports of people using Flameskulls where the players never figured out how to defeat it, and it became like the focus of several sessions.
Just constantly being stalked by this Flameskull that won't go away.
Yeah, like they thought they had got rid of it, and then it came back, and they killed it again, and they put it in a bag of holding, and they took it out to examine it later, and it came back again. It was on like a pirate ship, and they threw it overboard, and they returned inadvertently. They came back to that same spot like a few sessions later, and it came back in the middle of another fight. So I think you should include.
I love it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you should include instructions somewhere, but don't necessarily shove it in people's faces, because then it's just like then you're just hand feeding them.
Yeah, I do like a sort of like it follows type of situation where like you can move faster than Flameskull. You can get really far away from it after killing it, but like one of these days, that Flameskull is gonna catch up to you and just every once in a while you hit with a fireball out of nowhere.
Yeah. Because it does make noise sometimes. It laughs maniacally, and it is a flaming skull, so it's not exactly the most incognito thing out there, but it is small. And if it's intelligent and it's ordered to kill you, it's going to do that if it can. And it's intelligent enough. Maybe this is where the intelligence comes into play. It like knows how to execute its mandate intelligently. So it knows that maybe a full frontal assault on a person who's like in a tavern or something is going to get a lot of attention, and they might give the person a chance to escape. But if they're sneaky somehow, I don't know how a flaming skull can be sneaky, but they can try. They can somehow, maybe there's like a bonfire and it can hide in the fire or something. I don't know.
I mean, I can imagine it being intelligence in like a T-1000 from Terminator 2 type of way, right? Where it's not like it can solve problems to like accomplish its goal, but like it's not like a guy you can hang out with unless it's trying to like do something, like it can find creative ways to solve its problems, but it's like some weirdness there,
Yeah, it's still neurotically beholden to the order.
And like cannot help but like cackle maniacally when they think they got you, you know?
Yeah.
That's the one thing. It's like they can't not cackle when they think they got you.
Yeah, and maybe it even hurts to laugh or something. Like they just can't help it. There's one more paragraph that we skipped, but it is kind of self-explanatory. Wreathed in flames, the fire around the skull burns continuously, and it focuses this fire to shoot it through its eyes. Not much more I can say about that, except that maybe if you wanted to, you could change the variety of energy that the skull is wreathed in a typical D&D design way.
Yeah, to like maybe either suit the kind of wizard they were in life or the kind of wizard that like made them or their environment or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easiest thing in the world. Change it to lightning, cold, whatever. But there's just something classic about the flaming skull.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
There's some mentioning of in the Forgotten Realms lore about Flameskulls that whenever they got the opportunity, wizards and priests and alchemists would study Flameskulls to determine how to create them or copy their powers or to identify the unique properties of their flames, though with little to no success. Due to their great age, Flameskulls were apt to possess old and little known lore and historical secrets. So these are two other interesting angles you could take with it, where there are like, it's not just a obstacle to get through, it could be the objective of an adventure in itself, where you have to capture one because it knows a lot of stuff, or people want to like mess around with its cool fire.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You could cause a lot of chaos with a bag of holding full of flame skulls.
I think you could cause a lot of chaos with a bag of holding with almost anything in it.
Anything. Yeah, I guess it works like as like the kind of ridiculous creative like tools of destruction that D&D players so often come up with. I think like a bag of holding full of things works best with undead because they're not going to run out of air in there because there's specific running out of air mechanic bag of holding.
Right, for sure.
But it's like, oh man, we got to cause a distraction so that we can steal the thing, you know? So if you just like whip a bag of the bag of holding full of flame skulls into the guards barracks or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But harvesting all would be the hard part.
Yeah, that's a whole campaign by itself. Unless you just come across it as like the loot of a previous adventure.
Oh, like you found a bag of holding and you can use it, but you got to deal with the fact that it's full of flame skulls before using it as a regular bag of holding.
That's nefarious. I like that one. I have there's a blogger. The blog is called Dungeon Solvers, and it suggests 5 Flameskull plot hooks that I'm going to read that I think are all really good elaborations on things we've already mentioned and a few novel ideas. So the first is strange grave robbers. Grave robbers are a commonality in these parts. Bodies are buried with all sorts of valuable jewelries and coins, but a recent spree of grave robbery has coincided, is taking place. It's worded really weirdly here. But not only is the treasure missing, but so are the heads of the dead. Second one is a dangerous specimen. The necromancy professor at the Wizard College is looking for a Flameskull specimen to use as a demonstration in their lessons. find one and bring it to them before it can fully rejuvenate. So there's like a classic fetch and retrieve mission. Has a necromancy professor, which I'm not a huge fan of because that seems like in an immoral world.
Yeah.
Depending on what the state of souls are or what's going on, but that's okay. I'm fine with necromancy professors as long as we all realize that they're evil, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
There's no ethical necromancy under capitalism.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. It's like the equivalent of like I don't know what you go to school to. I guess business, but like whatever you do to become I don't know a hedge fund manager, right? I guess it's already be rich and get an internship, but like I don't know whatever that is, the equivalent of that.
Yeah. Next one is the Haunted Sepulchre. The family of magic users, their crypt has been tainted by dark magic. Rumors speak of chittering, flaming skulls patrolling the grounds after the sun sets. So there you lead with the Flameskulls as the hook. But really, I don't know. I think you would need more. I think a lot of my players would just be like, well, I'm going to stay away from that place then.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, office hours. An inexperienced, possibly evil necromancer is looking for some help. They tried to use a few Flameskulls to assault a bank, but were woefully unsuccessful. The Flameskulls flew off after they received their instructions, leading the necromancer to get arrested by the city guard. They're looking for a tutor to level up their nefarious plans. I know, but the tutor angle on that is kind of weird, but the dealing with like wayward Flameskulls that like have a bunch of money in their mouths but don't know what to do with it could be something. And then finally, a charred corpse. You open the door to the room to see a trio of Flameskulls hovering around a charred corpse of what was once a powerful wizard. They seem enamored by the strange necklace they're wearing, as if they recognize the symbol. So there you have a good example of using their previous lives, memories, and also maybe they've just been freed of their burden that they don't have to carry out anymore.
Yeah. I was just checking out the suggestions in the book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Demon for Flameskulls. And it's more or less like pretty much it's like a very mechanical sort of thing like we touched on earlier. They follow their orders and everything, but it sort of makes the case here that the way to interpret them being intelligent is and I guess you could do this with like a lot of D&D monsters too, but because they're intelligent, you can use your knowledge of the game as a DM to like fight more intelligently, like attack the healers first and like target the clerics and the paladins before someone, like instead of just like because if it was goblins, you just charge the goblins in, and then when the goblins start losing, have the goblins start running away when they start losing. They're not necessarily, or if it's just like some wild animals or something that's not going to come up with a plan, but like the sort of intelligence of the Flameskulls would be like no, they know how to strategically do this fight right now.
Yeah, and they're not afraid in the same way that something else would be.
They're not gonna, and they're gonna fight to the death, like because they know they can come back, and they're at working under the orders of like some necromancer or whatever, but like they aren't going to just like go into like a losing situation. Like they're gonna be very like art of war about it. They're gonna try to like make sure they can win, and that's the way the intelligence comes in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes we overthink things.
Yeah.
Flameskulls have been around since at least 2nd edition. Back then, the design hasn't changed at all, but back then you could make one from any dead humanoid, and only specially enchanted ones could cast spells. And then in 3rd, they changed it to be that only dead spellcasters could be turned into Flameskulls. And then 4th, they introduced the idea of them being ancient and knowing really old lore. And they also had a version which 4th edition is notorious for, where they just create variants that aren't any different, really. They just are more dangerous mechanically.
Yeah.
Which got me thinking about using a giant's head as a Flameskull to like terrorize a town.
Oh yeah, you can use all kinds of skulls.
Just big heads,
Yeah, big heads.
Big heads are scary.
Yeah, Andros from Star Fox. What's that movie? Zardoz?
Yeah.
Witch from Spirited Away.
The witch from Spirited Away.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can, tiny skulls be like Army of Darkness. You can just change it up with scaling. But I don't know. I like the big head. It's more charming. And then 5th edition came up with the idea of the slaves to the word of their masters and the lesser influence of their past lives. But before they were actually more, they were still servants of whoever created them, but they weren't like so slavish. And then 5th edition hammered in the slavishness. So if you wanted a more like curmudgeonly, maybe like an unwilling servant with like an attitude, dare I say, sarcastic Flameskull, there's precedent in the history.
That's he's not a flaming skull because he's not on fire, but that's one of the in the game Planescape Torment, which is it's in Sigil, it's in like the Planescape setting. The first companion you get in your party after you start the game is Mort, who's like just a floating skull who's very sarcastic and you can talk to, and like he can barely do combat, but he's just like a floating sarcastic skull that you can't die, he can't die, so you're buddies, but he's just there, and he doesn't know why he's a floating skull, but he's got a good attitude about it.
Right? Yeah, I think this is a classic trope. A classic kind of character, the ancient servant beholden to uncaring masters. It's like the paranoid android. What's his name? Marvin? Yeah. And there's one in like Knights of the Old Republic comes to mind, the like HK-47 or whatever his name is. So what are these? I'm gonna get into like what is a flaming skull? Like, what's going on? Why is it everywhere? Why is it on every motorcycle? What is like metal militia stickers and
because it seems like such like it seems like just like an elemental sort of like thing in like the human mind, right? It's like, well, I mean, skulls, like death, cool, hardcore, and what makes stuff better? Fire. Like it's sort of like I can see how it could that like same kind of image could convergently evolve all over the place, but like you put those two things together, there's something to it,
There is.
Flaming skull.
It's kind of childish on one hand. Like it's so primitive that it's silly and kind of meaningless, but it's also so ubiquitous that it's like you can't deny that it means something.
Yeah.
So usually, I think at its most basic, you can look at Ghost Rider.
Yeah.
To get a sense of what it is. And what you have is a spirit of vengeance who is a sort of tool or servant of hell, whose job it is to confront evildoers with their own evil and make them feel really bad so that when they die, they go to hell extra bad. There's a reason I think Ghost Rider never really took off, is that it's like the lore of it, it's so particular and moralistic that it doesn't really open itself up to the greater world.
Yeah, it's sort of like it kind of like, I don't know, that sort of kind of like cosmology with hell. Like it always seemed like Ghost Rider was like almost it was almost sort of like hell was like a prison and Ghost Rider was a cop, and it was like and I was like, yeah, get the bad guys. No, the devil's cool because he punishes bad guys. The devil's not bad, but like the devil's also bad. Like I don't know. I always get kind of confused with like the moral cosmology of it.
Yeah, and I think that's explored in the way that like he tries to whoever the spirit of vengeance is possessing often wrestles with their role.
Yeah,
where they're like punishing evildoers by inflicting them with the spirit of vengeance, but at the same time they're working for Satan.
Yeah,
who they're also opposed to. So they have to ride this line and try to figure out how to operate independently. Which, now that we're talking about that, it makes actually a lot of sense, I think, because the whole people that have a lot of flaming skull imagery, or even like the death's head, like the Punisher symbol.
Yeah,
these are people. It's like, and even the cops do this. You mentioned he's a Ghost Rider is like a hell cop. A lot of cops use the Punisher symbol, even though the Punisher is a vigilante.
Yeah.
And so there's this weird like spirit of independence, and even though these people are like the authority, they like to pretend that they are somehow above the limitations of their own rules or something. There's a really good I think we talked about this in the Demi-Lich episode, the death's head of the Punisher. There's a really good graphic essay by an artist named Nick Powell called About Face that he wrote and drew, I think, in like 2017 or something like that. That is a really great primer on how the Death's Head, and especially Punisher in particular, became the symbol of like kind of right-wing pro-military groups.
Yeah. No, it is. It's a really good essay on that.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna pump that again. Check that out. What were you gonna say?
Oh, and just like the idea of like sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like a legitimized vigilanteism. Like that's kind of the sort of fantasy of it. It's like, oh, I'm gonna be the one that goes out and does the thing, but like you can't just do that. But it's like, no, you're special. You can do it. You know?
Yeah, like the skull itself is like it's a symbol of power and a symbol of the power of death in particular.
Yeah.
So when you we'll get to the SS. I think I talked about all the SS. Emily is co-hosting with me from a distance. It's like when you're using skull imagery, it's not attached to any ideology. It's kind of like there are, as far as I know, aren't any religions where skulls by themselves are meaningful. They're just sort of this universal symbol of death, personified and confronted very simply. And I think when you take on that as your image, you are saying that, like, I hold the power of violence, of life and death, but are beholden to no one. That's why it was like a pirate symbol.
Yeah.
The Jolly Roger in various styles.
Which is not to say that like specific skull, icons don't have
particular meaning in different religions.
But like skulls in general don't. Yeah.
Yeah, like for sure. But there's a universality about it that makes it open to use by anyone, and it still works just the same.
Yeah.
Monster Mash interruption.
Yep, that's right. I am interrupting my own podcast because before I went to publish this, but after we had already recorded it, we had learned some new things about the Flameskull. Well, yeah. First of all, I probably went on a little too long about the Death's Head image thing and the Punisher and all that, because that's all fine, that's all good, but I already went on about it in the Demi-Lich episode, and it was probably a bit more relevant there. I gave it too much relevance in this episode because I didn't know this piece of information. I didn't know this topic existed. So I want to thank listener Jeff LaSala for bringing to my attention the existence of the way more specifically relevant topic of the screaming skull genre of gothic horror, of gothic ghost stories. This information comes by way of a very good podcast called Monster Talk. Check that out if monsters beyond D&D are interesting to you. And also if you like to hear from scientists who are dealing with disproving, usually, the existence of these real-life monsters. The Screaming Skull is a kind of micro-genre of gothic horror, and it is also based on real-world legends. Most famously, a place called Beddiscombe Manor. It is also known as the House of the Screaming Skull in England, somewhere in England. Don't ask me where. Due to a legend dating from the 19th century. The Pinney family had been living in the Caribbean, but they returned to their family home at Beddiscombe Manor in 1830, but they brought with them some of their black slaves. While in his master's service, one of the servants was taken seriously ill with a suspected case of tuberculosis. As he lay dying, the servant swore that he would never rest until his body was returned to his homeland. But when he died, Pinney refused to pay for such an expensive burial and instead had the body interred in the grounds of St. Stephen's Church Cemetery. After the burial, ill fortune plagued the village for many months, and screams and crying were heard coming from the cemetery. Other disturbances were reported from the manor house, such as windows rattling and doors slamming of their own accord. The villagers went to the manor to seek advice. The body of the servant was exhumed and the body taken to the manor house for some reason. In the process of time, the skeleton has long since vanished, except for the skull, where it has remained in the house for centuries. And people claim they can still hear it screaming because they don't send it back to Jamaica still. It's kind of like the British Museum problem all over again, except with a human head. There are lots of other screaming skull stories. One that I find interesting is Screaming Skull of Tunstead Farm. At a farmhouse in Dorsetshire at the present time is carefully preserved a human skull which has been there for a period long antecedent to the present tenancy. The peculiar superstition attaching to it is that if it be brought out of the house itself would rock to its foundations, while the person by whom such an act of desecration was committed would certainly die within the year. So this is the opposite problem. This is a skull that does not want to be moved and lets you know. This skull brings good luck and protection to the farm where it is stored. There is a 19th century travelogue called The Perambulations of Barney the Irishman, wherein the titular Barney observes, "There are many strange stories in Tunstead concerning a skull in the possession of Mr. John Bramwell, who holds it in great veneration, declaring that it prevents the house and farm from being robbed, and that he would sooner part with the best cow he has than with the skull." Sitting on the farmhouse windowsill, the Tunstead skull, known as Dickie, mostly looked out over the farmlands, making sure nothing was amiss, until the railway company tried to build a new track through a part of the Tunstead land. According to locals at the time, each day the company would start building the track, and each night Dickie would undo their work. In 1863, a magazine called The Panorama reported, "It was the steadfast belief in the district that the ghost would undo, at the Combs Embankment, the work which had occupied many men during the day, and that Dickie was only satisfied at last by an interview with the engineer at which he was promised a free passage over the line forever." So that's cute. That's an appeasement strategy. Since I'm just inserting all this here and I'm doing this solo, I'm trying to be succinct, but I cannot understate how central this story is to the Flameskull monster of D&D. I'm sorry I missed it. Thanks again to Jeff, but this is the kernel from which the popcorn of the Flameskull bursts into flames. This is it. More than anything else we talk about. I got to talking again. So, in the first legend of Bettiscombe Manor, the skull belongs to a servant who wants to go back to Jamaica, but his master is too cheap to do it. So now, the guilt, the pain of this person is manifest as a spooky ghost skull and noises coming from the grave that the whole village hears. So now, the whole village is privy to the guilt, the wrongdoings of this one house. And ill will befall them evermore until it is laid to rest. Like a ghost story, except this subtype of ghost story has a physical focus in the skull, which is no greater object to symbolize death. And accusation, because the skull can actually look at you, and you look back into it. They place it inside the skull, or they place it in the manor where you can see it, which is interesting. They don't hide it. They can't hide it, is the problem. It's the elephant in the room. Everyone knows it's there, but you can't do anything about it. It's unprocessed familial guilt. The skull was wronged. I mean, they could send it back, but nobody does. Why? Because they're too British, I think. They'd have to admit something was wrong. And if you combine this with the other legend, where the skull sits watch and protects its owner's land, now we've got a Flameskull, a magically animated skull doomed to protect the property of its master against its own will. And just like guilt, the Flameskull won't go away just by hitting it. The rites must be performed, the wrongs must be righted, or something. Something has to be done besides attacking it. The Flameskull in the game will come back. Most famously, the Screaming Skull is fictionally rendered, well, famously as far as short stories from the 19th or 18th century can be. The short story, The Screaming Skull by F. Marion Crawford is synopsized thusly. It is told in real time by the skull's would-be victim, a man responsible for its demise. The narrator is a retired sea captain, bit of a pirate. He describes the actions, including his guests' reactions. He says things like, "You don't need to look so nervous. It's only the sound of the tide going out, not a scream. Yes, you can have more to drink. I'll pour you a bigger glass to steady your hand. It's shaking." So it gives you a feeling of an anxious vertigo. People are not acting right. They're hearing things even though they're being told that everything's okay. The old captain tells his visitor on a dark and stormy night, of course, how he inadvertently gave a friend the idea of killing his wife, a miserable woman who had lost 2 teeth from her lower jaw, by pouring lead in her ear. Years later, he inherits the man's house along with a skull that he suspects may have a grudge out for him. After all, when he shakes it, there's a rattling sound like a kernel of lead is trapped inside, and those teeth look sharp enough to draw blood. Our eccentric sea dog protagonist leads us through a story of bitterness, deceit, and rage as a storm literally rages outside, and the fire snaps before him and his curiously quiet guest. The 2 men spend the tempestuous night drinking heavily and unraveling the story of the host's wife's disappearance, the discovery of a skull which had been buried outside, and the bizarre events surrounding its restoration to the house. The lights are snuffed by the crashing storm, and the men find themselves terrorized by a shrieking skull with a long repressed bloodlust. His friend flees the brutal lover's quarrel and ends the story with a newspaper clipping which describes how the captain was later found with his throat torn out. The tooth marks medical men queasily confirm belong to a human being with 2 teeth missing from the lower jaw. Ooh. How can you use this in the game? You can give the Flameskull a tragic backstory, which you then have to unravel in order to either put the skull to rest or satisfy the skull's sense of vengeance. If you can put something in front of it to make its master vulnerable to it, would actually allow it to circumvent its master's control and take vengeance. Or maybe also another thing you could do is, instead of it being an artifact belonging to somebody who owns a dungeon and uses it to guard things, maybe it just exists in an eccentric rich person's house. Still inviting you to mystery, still inviting you to unravel a murder mystery, maybe. We now return to the originally scheduled podcast. Thank you for this important digression. And in case I didn't get into it last time, just to make sure I cover it, Death's Head as a symbol first showed up. You could see it in graves and mausoleum decorations, and it just had more to do with like a symbol of death. So you're there at a grave and you're looking at like, oh, of course, this is death that I'm facing. It's plane that comes for us all. This is just something that we recognize. And then in the military, it first came up in the 1700s in a Prussian regiment fighting against Napoleon. And that symbol kind of persisted in various German units as the years went on. And then most famously as the Nazi SS symbol, and which makes them even scarier because they have all this crazy conspiracy lore about them, about how they were like up to all of this like occult research, and their insignias and their methods and their symbolism is just full of like weird occult meanings. So having a death's head is not just a light symbol to connect them, like it at once connects them to their like older Prussian history, but it also makes them like, I think they really meant it, and that is a power that people today are really like lusting after.
Yeah,
it's just like power, and the power of death, specifically the authority to mete out death no matter who you are. So you see, that's why like a lot of blacked out trucks and some really antisocial looking people having Punisher logos, because now it's like a Disney product basically.
Yeah.
So it's not weird to have it, even though it is totally weird.
It is really weird. And the weirdest part is specifically, and the essay that you mentioned before, it touches on this too. But like a lot of the people like with blacked out trucks and all this like tactical nonsense and Punisher heads on this stuff are like specifically the people Punisher the character like would have like despised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found another great resource on the Punisher on a website called Truth Out, which I don't know anything else about. So if they turn out to be horrible people, I'm very sorry. But this essay on the Punisher throughout history is in particular related to how the state has used the Punisher, or how the Punisher has reflected the values of whatever time in whatever military happenings were going on, whatever conflicts were happening. So originally, the Punisher was a foil to more conventional comic heroes. Like they both wanted justice. Spider-Man is like one of the major foils that they would put the Punisher up against.
Yeah.
They would both want justice, but the Punisher wanted it immediately, on his terms, and permanently. So there was no like Batman locking up every villain in Arkham, the rotating door at Arkham Asylum.
Yeah.
He wanted to put them in the ground and be done with it. And at the time, this was like in the 60s, it was too spicy to have his own comic and be his own hero, because that wasn't like the way things were done. But then in the Reagan years and the war on drugs, suddenly the Punisher, most of the comics was about him going down to South America and like shooting up cartels and killing lots of South American people. And even though in real life the CIA was heavily involved in a lot of that shit,
Yeah.
none of the Punisher comics would go that far. They always ended with like some South American drug lord. Part of the propaganda of that was that it was like time to get tough. We can't obey all these rules that stop us from fighting the war on drugs. We got to be a cowboy. We got to bend them. We got to do the right thing no matter what it takes. And you see this in like endless parade of like kind of right-wing action films where the loose cannon gets the job done, right?
Yeah.
So these are all just regular old death's heads. These aren't flaming skulls. What makes it a flaming skull, the Ghost Rider image, is like you're imbued with a spirit or a passion or an external source of that flame, which turns it into a more supernatural or perhaps spiritual symbol. But it doesn't have to, it's not specific. It just means, I think people that like the symbol like the idea of being full of something, of a conviction, you know?
Yeah.
The necromancer that created it.
Yeah, like there's so much magical energy in here. It's like it's coming out. It's on fire, you know? It's not staying inside. Shooting out of its eyes.
Yeah. But it's a nefarious energy. It's not good. Like the skull doesn't like it necessarily, and it's not its own power.
It's green fire. That's never good.
Yeah.
Something's really going wrong if fire's green.
You don't want that. I found a website called Skull Action, which seems to be a website dedicated to like skull merchandise, which is a market I didn't think you could corner. And I'm not sure they have, but they're definitely trying. I bet they do a lot of business to like bikers and like roadside jewelry sellers on Queen Street or whatever. But they also have a component in it called Skull Action Magazine.
Skull Action Magazine.
Which is just a blog, but it's a hell of a title.
Yeah, it really is. Whoa.
Yeah. I'm gonna read a small excerpt from it, but it's written by someone who I don't think speaks English as their first language. And it's a more of a maybe a first-hand encounter about what a flaming skull means to someone who writes for Skull Action Magazine. Flaming skulls show power and bravery. Skull tattoos are in different forms these days. This tattoo configuration frequently represents power and bravery. Skull image is there in practically every religion globally, and it frightened individuals from old times. Bullet point. Their bones are a conventional private seal, so skull tattoo designs frequently mean opportunity. I don't really fully know what that means, but that kind of goes along with like the idea of pirates. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know? Their proprietors need to uncover the concept that they don't have regard for social standards. So having a flaming skull tattoo means you don't give a shit about social standards, which is another rule-breaking aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that necromancy is like, and the undead are neutral evil. They're just simply the power of undeath, but like not committed to any particular cause necessarily, only the cause of the individual.
Yeah.
And the third bullet point here is they show that opportunity is the most significant incentive for them. That one just sounds like a fortune cookie. I don't really know what that means.
Opportunity is the most significant incentive.
Opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. And then a final word here. There are many types of skull tattoo designs. Flaming one is frequently made to underscore the strong will of the proprietor. It is quite possibly the most famous skull tattoo among extremes and individuals enamored with hazards. So if you love hazards, you're probably a skull tattoo guy.
Yeah, that tracks. I'm trying to come up with a AFI, a Fire Inside joke, but I'm not getting anything. I'm trying to remember any of their songs, and I can't.
Even if you had made one, it would be totally lost on me.
Yeah.
On top of the examples I gave, I could think of two famous ones, or at least nerd famous. In Warhammer, the margins of all the books and in the background of every image, at least for the Imperium, there are servo skulls.
Yeah.
Which are, I knew you like it. So they are flying skull robots that they use as like automatic cameras or light sources, computers sometimes, and their presence, their ubiquity kind of emphasizes death as an all-consuming element, so much so that it's just used as a tool, as like a vital tool of the entire organization. And having flying skulls everywhere as a matter of course tells you that death is a necessary element of the day-to-day function of the Empire.
Yeah. And the reason that they do that instead of just make regular drones too is because they don't trust artificial intelligence, because like thousands of years ago they had a robot uprising that nearly destroyed the society. So instead, and this is like, if you commit a crime in the Imperium, your sentence is like you can become like sentenced to be a servo skull now. And so they like it's a living brain inside of the skull that they use in lieu of computer chips and it's a cyborg basically is what it is. So it's a person that's still alive, but they don't have free will anymore because their brain is used as the raw material to program a drone.
And they need more is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and they need more, and they also even darker are the cherubim, and so they just make babies into the same thing as servo skulls, but they give them wings through genetic mutation so that they look like little angel babies, but they're also weird little cyborg automatons.
Well, I'm sure there's a good reason for that.
What else are you gonna do?
With all these babies.
If you can make robot baby servants.
I would not want a baby serving me. Are you kidding me?
Not yet. I'll take a servo skull, thank you.
Like, I appreciate the offer, but yeah, can we get an adult in the room, please? And then finally, also Terminator, which doesn't really have flying skulls. I think there might be one shot of like a Terminator head flying towards the camera. I might be thinking of a video game or something. I just feel like there's a flying robot skull that happens at some point. But again, it's the ubiquity of all the skulls. Like in the future presented in Terminator, it's just like lousy with skulls,
Oh yeah.
robot skulls and human.
Yeah, mostly skulls. I think there's some flying on fire skulls in Doom, in the Doom games that you have to shoot.
Oh, for sure. There's got to be.
I honestly, I would be surprised if there is like a RPG out there that doesn't have a flaming skull monster somewhere in it,
Yeah, I guess this is a perfect embodiment of like
It's great.
neutral evil. It's just a bad thing. It is death, but not only is it death, it's possessed by something. The fire says that this is not an accidental flying skull.
Yeah.
It's
And I
got
feel
a
like
purpose.
it's a skull that's on fire, like taps into something. This might be particular to like parts of the world where there's a lot of like influenced by Abrahamic religions, but like a flaming skull is like that's like dying and going to hell, in like one visual neat little metaphor.
Oh yeah. Suffering, dying and
Yeah.
suffering, one way or another. Hell, or even just the state of being undead.
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave off with the story. I can only find one kind of fairy tale lore example of fiery skulls, and it is a Russian fairy tale, and it kind of neatly shows you the idea that skulls, flaming skulls, as a symbol of mastery of death, doesn't have to be negative necessarily, and they are more mercenary. They serve or hinder. So this is called Vasilisa the Beautiful. It's a Russian fairy tale collected by Alexander Afanasiev and William Ralston Shedden Ralston in Russian. I'm going to re-record this all by myself. In Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore. So Vasilisa is the youngest. She's the stepdaughter, classic Cinderella stuff. Her stepmother and stepsisters set her tasks she manages with her mother's blessing and the doll her dead mother gave her. When she comes of age, all the young men want to marry her, rather than the older stepsisters, which the stepmother forbids. So very similar to goddammit, Cinderella. Finally, having sent her into the woods many times in hopes that Baba Yaga would eat her, she has her sent directly to the witch to get fire after they had deliberately quenched all their fires. She finds Baba Yaga in a hut set on chicken legs, surrounded by skulls on posts that glow at night. Baba Yaga sets her impossible tasks, but when she finds out that Vasilisa succeeds with the help of her mother's blessing, she evicts her, giving her a lantern made from a skull for fire, because no one with a blessing can stay with Baba Yaga. When she returned, she found that the stepmother and stepsisters had been unable to light a fire the whole time she was gone. The witch's skull quickly sets the entire house on fire and burns it to the ground with the stepmother and stepsisters inside. Vasilisa found shelter with an old woman and began to spin flax and weave the thread. When the old woman brought it to the market, she brought it to the Tsar, who could not find seamstresses capable of sewing it. It was brought back to Vasilisa, who could. Whereupon the Tsar insisted on seeing her, fell in love, and married her. So a happy ending. I guess the moral is, if you have the blessing of your family, of your true family, you can get away with anything. And the flaming skull visits vengeance on Vasilisa's enemies after she's mastered it from Baba Yaga. Maybe not mastered it, but has just kind of judoed it. She's jujitsu'd the power of death that Baba Yaga has, and has redirected it onto her stepmother and stepsisters. So there's an example of Flameskull's being used as truly neutral evil creatures. And that's all I got. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Heads, flying heads. I think this might be the last flying head type thing.
I think so, yeah. There might be another one. There is, I don't know, we don't really have time to get into it, but like we go back to our Demi-Lich episode also and compare and contrast.
Yeah, listen to them at the same time.
Yeah. One in one ear, the other in the other ear, and just see what becomes of you at the end of that.
See how you feel.
Yeah.
That. Okay, I don't have it in front of me. What's next? Do you know what's next?
Oh, let me
I'm trying to load it, but it's taking a long time on my computer.
Flameskull. Oh man, it's either, I think it's Flameskull.